Welcome to the Women's Connection. The Women's Connection is a program about events shaping women's lives and helping one gain authentic power on a personal or professional level. So won't you join us? Welcome. Many of us in our lifetime will change careers 8 times, if not more. And our guest today is one such woman. And I would like to welcome Maggie Craddock and learn how she went from being a fund manager to coaching. Maggie, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't you give us a brief history of your background?
Sure. I worked on Wall Street for over a decade. I would say probably the highlight of my Wall Street career were the years when I was the lead portfolio manager for the Global Bond and Currency Group at Scudder. And in those years we had a terrific team. We won 2 Lipper Awards for top mutual fund performance on a national scale.
That's quite an achievement.
Well, the team was part of that achievement as well, but yes, we worked very hard, and it was a terrific group. However, I made the transition after a few years from Wall Street to go back and get my counseling degree at New York University, and then through psychoanalytic training, and made the transition to combining my work experience with my therapeutic training, and now I work as an executive coach.
Wow. Well, let's go back. What were your days like as a fund manager?
Very, very busy. One day almost ran into the next. I would often tell my friends, if you want to know where I am, look up. I'm on a plane going from somewhere to somewhere. I was running all the time. I think I spent all my weekends reading macroeconomic research, and I would sort of live and breathe those funds while I was running them. There wasn't much time for balance, and there wasn't much time for much else.
Wow. Now, what was the catalyst that made you decide to switch careers?
Well, you know, in those days, I actually interviewed behavioral consultants that came in to help us with things like understanding the human side of business on the trading floor and this sort of thing. And around the same period, I was also being interviewed by the SEC because we were one of the first mutual funds to use options in our currency book.
Oh, okay.
And it wasn't that we were doing anything that wasn't totally appropriate, but they just wanted to understand how to regulate us.
Oh, nice.
So, I know. So I would answer their questions as they were asked, but I realized when they were asking me the questions sometimes, that's not really the information you want to get out. If you phrased the question a little differently, if you understood the environment a little more intimately, you'd ask it a little differently. And so realizing from that experience how important it was to be able to understand the environment, to get as much depth as possible, that's when I realized many of the behavioral consultants who actually hadn't spent time on Wall Street would benefit from knowing that culture a little bit more fully in terms of what they were doing.
That's quite an analyzing it. Well, you were in the analyzing business and you really analyzed it very well.
I really did. As a matter of fact, I analyzed the transition pretty carefully in terms of how I was going to make it.
Wow, that's quite an undertaking here. Now let me ask you something. You're wearing a very interesting necklace.
Yes.
And you call that your goddess necklace?
This is my goddess necklace, and I used to have a little fun every now and then on the morning trading meetings. We would meet at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I used to have a very tailored Talbot suit that was a shade of green that matches these beads. And I would put on this necklace occasionally, and I'd watch the male traders lean over to try to figure out how specifically endowed this little goddess was. But yes, she's been a friend of mine for a long time.
What is coaching?
Well, coaching is really the way that I do it, working with people to help them develop the self-awareness and the self-confidence to take meaningful risks on their own behalf.
Okay, when you interview, well, let's see, I've got so many questions going through my head here.
Sure.
All right, if somebody wanted to hire you, what kind of questions should they ask at the outset to find out if you're the appropriate coach for them?
That's a terrific question, because since executive coaching is relatively new, it's important to do due diligence on this because there aren't really degrees or certifications for this the way there are in other professions. So first, in my opinion, an executive coach should have a strong track record in business. And you should ask them a little bit about that, and ask them also why they chose to make the transition from their business into coaching. So it's helpful to work with somebody who understands the politics of a large organization, particularly if that's where you're trying to maximize your success, and or someone who hopefully has run a department or run a business so they understand the ownership mentality in terms of some of the business challenges that somebody might be facing. Now, the other piece of that I feel particularly strongly about is having some sort of therapeutic or human change credentials also. Somebody doesn't need to be a licensed therapist. I think it's a terrific tool because you really do get into some deep personal issues with people. But whoever you're interviewing as a coach should have some theory of human behavior and change. It could be cognitive, it could be behavioral, it could be psychoanalytic, but whatever it is, they should be able to explain it to you simply, and you need to resonate with it and find it logical in terms of your own challenges.
Because I know a lot of women are, or I shouldn't say women, a lot of people are becoming a coach and they take a course on the internet.
Right. And that really isn't, I mean, there are coaching certification programs out there, just like there are aromatherapy certification programs, which I'm sure are terrific too, that they offer you a few courses, and the courses themselves are often taught by people who are not licensed therapists and don't have a deep depth in terms of business credentials themselves. So sometimes those credentialing programs are set up more for the benefit of the program than in the benefit of the graduates. I've had a couple of clients who came to me who wanted to become coaches, and I've suggested to them that they would be better off taking some MBA courses in the industry that they would like to help in terms of coaching, rather than going through a generalized coaching certification program.
Oh, interesting. Now you have an MSW. What exactly is that?
Well, that's a master's in social work, and I did a lot of research in terms of various degrees that might help enhance my business experience when I made the transition. And I chose the MSW because its problem-solving framework spans both the individual challenges and the organizational challenges. So I'm always coming in and saying you have to understand both the individual perspective and the organizational dynamic. The MSW has what they call the systems theory approach in terms of analyzing a problem. So they'll look at the individual as a system, the family as a system, the community as a system, but that's very easily translatable into the individual, the department, the industry, and even the economy as a whole. And then if we were just to stop there, we would have the area where the organizational development people really have their black belt. But what's particularly appealing to me about social work is you also have this long concept called the biopsychosocial framework, that it helps you to remember to look at each individual both from a biological point of view, and in Wall Street terms, this is, are they over-caffeinated? Have they slept? Did they just get off the Concorde? You know, what physical specimen have you got with you here in terms of their judgment? The psychoanalytic component, which I think can be helpful, but it's a tool, not a solution. And then finally, the overall cultural context. That gets into diversity issues, racial issues, but really in business, it gets into multicultural issues, particularly for people who want to operate profitably in Europe, abroad, and in other cultures they don't understand as well.
Real quickly, how would you define risk, by taking a risk?
Well, you know, I suppose the generic definition of risk is sort of danger or harm that might befall you if things don't happen the way that you would hope. What I think is very important for people in terms of taking risk in business, and no risk, no reward, and this is something that people often forget about, is that they have to be willing to make mistakes. They have to be willing to go into the unknown, try unproven territory, and yes, they may make some mistakes and they may fail, but those experiences can be some of their most important catalysts in terms of success as well.
Okay. What are some tips if you're changing jobs?
Well, the main one that I would say from a coaching perspective is this job market right now is pretty tight. So your basic resume and cover letter is perhaps a necessary but not sufficient set of tools to get you a job. So I would say even the greatest resume and cover letter isn't going to be helpful for you unless you've really done your homework in terms of the organizations you'd like to approach, the people within them, what their needs are, how they're segmenting themselves in the market vis-a-vis their major competitors. And also, if it's possible, do a little homework on a company that you would like to go into, not just as a business entity, but as a social system.
Social system?
As a social system, because you will have to work with these people, you will have to be able to work productively with them, you'll have to be supported by them, and you're going to need to feel comfortable there in order to really give as much effort as you need to make it in today's economy.
Wow. Let me ask you one question here that pertains to spirituality. Mm-hmm. How much does that play a part in what you do?
Well, it actually plays a large part in that if there weren't a spiritual component to it, I don't think I would have left the price point of Wall Street to transition to the price point of coaching. I will also say, though, that spirituality is something that, it's a word that one can't use right now very openly in an organizational context. individuals are fairly open to it. Although organizations, some of them are coming that way, are a little more closed in that regard. There's a lot of fear in organizations, and things have to be put in a context that they're very task-oriented and profit-driven. When you get into the area of spirituality, it's a word that has been perhaps misused by rigid religions or sort of, New Age people, and its interpretation in a business context is a little bit wider.
Would that also be because men don't really believe in spirituality, at least the men that I've met in my lifetime so far don't really believe in it, and it's more of a woman's thing?
Well, I think what's particularly interesting about that is if you think about people's openness to spiritual concepts, and at the risk of just being too quantitative, if you think about it like a normal distribution,
Right.
you tend to get the women at both ends. You tend to get the
Interesting.
very open women who, I've had women come to me and say, I'm coming to you for spiritual counseling. And I laugh at that because I think, how can you call anything coaching or spiritual counseling? Because everything, in a way, is spiritual. So if you split something off and label it as spiritual, that doesn't make sense to me in
Doesn't make
one
sense to
context.
me.
But, there are people who come to coaching and are really very open to the metaphor of using their career success as a catalyst for their spiritual growth. And I'm 100% behind that, regardless of their religious foundation. The thing that also is challenging, though, is at the other end of that normal distribution, many women in organizations find themselves, perhaps even more so than men, very rigid, very closed. They fall into what I call spiritual anorexia. They're so concerned
Good
about
word.
proving that they're good enough and they have the right corporate presentation and they're not getting involved with any this soft nonsense that they can almost go the other way. So you find women at both tails of the distribution, and then men kind of more in the middle.
Oh, interesting. What skills would you say are important today?
Well, in terms of succeeding in today's employment market, I would have to say communication skills are more important than ever. If I had to isolate the one thing that I'm always trying to emphasize with my clients, it's that I often get extremely intelligent clients who are frustrated by their inability to get ahead politically, and I'm always trying to remind them in terms of communication skills, please try not to prove to other people how smart you are.
Oh, interesting.
Try
Okay.
to prove how smart they are for giving you an opportunity. So you don't want to leave a meeting having convinced someone that you're so smart. You want to leave a meeting with that person feeling good about themselves, happy, comfortable, and feeling that they're going to be smart to hire you or to give you significant responsibility.
Because their job's also on the line if it
That's right.
doesn't work.
That's right. And there's also the art of getting things done through other people. There's a lot of competition today. So you can't afford to be too threatening. It's sort of that balance of standing out and fitting in at the same time.
Wow. In closing,
Yes.
what would you like to leave the audience with?
Well, I would say some of the main things to think about are be adaptable, try to have a portfolio of career strategies. Once a portfolio manager, always a portfolio manager. And also remember to network as widely as possible and with as positive an attitude as you can. I'm constantly saying to clients, you can't be more successful than your self-image allows you to be. Get out there, network. You never know where the next great opportunity will come.
Great. Maggie, thank you so much for joining me
Thank you for
today.
having me.
And it's been very interesting. And I hope you've learned some valuable tips in your career search.